Hello, I'm the Analyst, and normally I'm here to talk about Hollywood's biggest box office flops. And welcome to another entry in the What Could Have Flopped series. Now, with the summer movie season having kicked off a couple weeks ago with Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2, and will continue this weekend with Pirates of the Caribbean Dead Men Tell No Tales, Hollywood is launching their tentpoles in massive theater counts with mega marketing efforts. But that wasn't always the case, as film merchandising and major releases weren't really introduced until the late 70s, when the traditional summer blockbuster was truly born, as traditionally films were given limited exhibition and tended to play in a few cities at a time before moving. That began to change in 1975 with Steven Spielberg's Jaws, a horror film that took a different approach to exposition, playing in hundreds of locations at once instead of a couple, and the result was the highest grossing film ever made at the time. So now let's advance the clock 2 years to a film that was just as important, if not more so than Jaws, in shaping the summer blockbuster. And in honor of its 40th anniversary, this is George Lucas's sci-fi opera has become an icon in pop culture, spawning a film franchise, multiple television series, including a So Bad It's Good TV movie, action figures, video games, and countless parodies. But in 1977, nobody saw this coming, and this was one of the biggest gambles ever thrown. First, the sci-fi genre hadn't exactly been on a winning streak in the recent years, as the 50s had a number of outings that could be considered as B movies, and the genre had slowed down. A couple of sci-fi films had broken out, but they were generally few and far between. Essentially, what George Lucas was trying to do was almost unheard of in its massive scope. How well did he manage this? Let's dive right in. And yes, we will be using the 1997 special edition for this review. My apologies in advance. Now, when it was originally released, it was simply known as Star Wars. No Episode 4, no New Hope anywhere to be seen. They were added in subsequent re-releases to help align it with its sequel, The Empire Strikes Back. We open our blockbuster with what would become a series staple, a text crawl. Traditionally, the rule in storytelling is show, don't tell. But this was something new entirely. It had to be set up, the context put into perspective, or everyone else would be lost trying to understand it. Additionally, the events described would have likely caused a number of major budget overruns. So it had to be told rather than shown. Following that comes a chase sequence between a massive gray starship and a small white cruiser, aka the Star Destroyer, chasing the Tantive 4. And on board the ship, we meet the droids, C-3PO and R2-D2, portrayed by Anthony Daniels and Kenny Baker respectively, meant to be the film's comic relief for the younger audiences. And the two droids are concerned that they're about to be destroyed by the Imperials. The Star Destroyer captures the Tantive 4 and stormtroopers promptly board it and overwhelm the rebel forces. And that is before Darth Vader makes his presence known, and would mark himself as one of the greatest cinematic villains of all time. Well, at least according to the original trilogy. Princess Leia, meanwhile, portrayed by the late Carrie Fisher, plants a disc inside of R2-D2 as the two droids flee the Tantive 4 before the stormtroopers find them, as they are searching for the Death Star plans and the remaining passengers, ultimately capturing Leia. The escape pod with the two droids crashes onto a desert planet, and they end up splitting up, disagreeing on which way is the right way to go, only to both be captured by little people in brown cloaks. But better known as the Jawas. They stop at the home of Owen Lars and his nephew Luke, Mark Hamill. It only took 17 minutes or so to meet our main protagonist. Lars buys C-3PO, and eventually R2-D2 as well. While cleaning the droids, Luke triggers a distress call from Leia calling for Obi-Wan Kenobi, one of the last Jedi Masters. R2-D2 flees in search for Obi-Wan, and Luke and C-3PO follow him only to encounter the Sand People, better known as Tusken Raiders. They knock Luke out and try to raid his vehicle, only to be driven off by a large man in a brown cloak. He brings Luke back to consciousness and reveals himself to be an old friendly man
Obi-Wan Kenobi. Is he a relative of yours? Do you know who he's talking about?
Who would later regret this part, primarily because it overshadowed the rest of his illustrious filmography, and he simply saw it as an easy paycheck. A very lucrative paycheck. Ben reveals himself to be Obi-Wan and explains that he and Luke's father Anakin were Jedi Knights in the Clone Wars, and gives Luke his father's lightsaber before saying that Darth Vader, Obi-Wan's former pupil, betrayed and murdered him. That is partially true based on what we learn in future entries, except for the betrayed and murdered part. Obi-Wan sees the rest of the message and asks Luke to join him, but Luke is reluctant to do so. Meanwhile, the Imperial officers are meeting on the Death Star to discuss the rebellion's actions, and we meet Grand Moff Tarkin, played by Peter Cushing. Fun fact, Cushing did almost the entire shoot while wearing his slippers, because he didn't like the boots his uniform required. When one of the officers is skeptical about Vader's abilities, Vader chokes him to prove his usefulness, and further cements himself as a bad guy not to be trifled with. On Tatooine, Luke and Obi-Wan find the Jawas slaughtered, the Empire having made it look like a Tusken Raider attack, and Luke is ultimately too late to save Uncle Owen and Aunt Beru from the stormtroopers looking for the droids they bought. As such, Luke agrees to join Obi-Wan on his journey to Alderaan to deliver the Death Star plans. Traveling to Mos Eisley,
the more wretched hive of scum and villainy,
we see an iconic moment, the Jedi mind trick.
These aren't the droids you're looking for.
These aren't the droids we're looking for.
The Mos Eisley Cantina. We can see what the lightsaber can do, and that guy definitely had it coming. Besides, replacement arms are readily available in this universe, as shown by the other entries. Obi-Wan finds Chewbacca, and through him we meet the breakout character of the series, Han Solo, and it took just under 48 minutes out of this 124-minute movie. Obi-Wan is able to negotiate a ride to Alderaan, and then comes Han versus Greedo. And yes, in the special edition, Greedo shoots first, though it's more ambiguous in the original. Regardless, the result's the same, Han wins. Stormtroopers try to stop the group, but they successfully escape in the Millennium Falcon and jump to hyperspeed. Meanwhile, Vader attempts to get the information out of Leia, but is unable to get anything out of her, so Tarkin instead threatens to destroy Alderaan. And when Leia seemingly gives up the rebel base, Tarkin still orders the planet destroyed as a demonstration of its power and has her sentenced to death. The Falcon arrives to find the remains of Alderaan and is then sucked up by a tractor beam onto the Death Star. Hiding from the stormtroopers, they sneak into a control room to locate the tractor beam's power source and then discover Leia's location. Using a Trojan prisoner ploy with Chewbacca, they sneak through the detention center and rescue Leia, making a very narrow escape through the trash compactor and a collapsed bridge, while Obi-Wan disables the tractor beam, evading the stormtroopers before encountering Vader. Obi-Wan and Darth Vader duel. While one of the most memorable scenes of the film, the fight isn't quite as impressive as other lightsaber battles, or even considering Vader's menace in Rogue One, where he chopped right through the rebel forces without breaking a sweat. Of course, there is a theory for the encounter in Rogue One, Vader had been resting in a bacta pod, allowing him to enter that battle fully rested. But here, he's obviously been busy for several days, chasing after the rebels and interrogating Leia, so he isn't quite at his best. And Obi-Wan has been inactive for several decades, so his skills aren't quite up to snuff either. To keep the others from coming back for him and thus jeopardizing the rebels, Obi-Wan allows Darth Vader to kill him. Therefore,
I shall become more powerful than you can possibly imagine.
Much to Luke's shock, and the group flees in the Falcon, taking out a number of enemy TIE fighters, unaware that they were let go in order to locate the rebel base. The Millennium Falcon arrives at the rebel base of Yavin 4, where the rebel leaders go over the Death Star plans and the necessary target required to destroy the Death Star, a direct proton torpedo hit to the thermal exhaust port. A nearly impossible shot. Okay, this is a pretty big weakness, so why exactly would the Empire have it so accessible? And how would they not know of this crippling weakness? Another theory. They did know it, and they also knew it was a nearly impossible shot. The only one that could do it would be a Force-sensitive pilot. Of course, the Empire has a Force-sensitive pilot. And if Tarkin were to go rogue and use the Death Star for his own purposes, Vader could fly out and destroy the Death Star. Luke joins as one of the pilots, while Han is reluctant to join in the fight, having not signed on for that and getting the pay he was promised. The rebel pilots move in to take out the Death Star before it can destroy Yavin 4, only to encounter intense Imperial opposition, including Darth Vader and his customized TIE fighter, which results in many of the rebel pilots being killed. But before Vader can shoot down Luke, Han and the Falcon drive him off. Luke turns off the targeting computer and uses the Force, as guided by Obi-Wan, to send the torpedo into the thermal exhaust port, resulting in the destruction of the Death Star just before it can take out the rebel base, killing Tarkin and the Imperial forces on board. The film ends with an award ceremony where Leia awards Luke, Han, and Chewie with medals for their valor and bravery. Looking back at Star Wars, it has left an immeasurable legacy behind, though admittedly part of that comes from the sequels. As a film, there's a lot that worked. The characters, the story, the visuals, the score. Which all holds up impressively well. Of course, as seemed to be normal for the time, it does take a bit of time to get fully immersed in the universe, and of course, the stormtroopers are fairly moronic, and thank God they're moronic. If you're patient enough, though, this is a ride worth taking. And this is definitely a must-see. Fox would end up investing $11 million into the production of Star Wars, which was more than the originally budgeted $8.25 million, and then would add another $16.5 million to market and distribute. 20 years later, they would release the special edition at a cost of $10 million. Of course, instead of asking for a fixed fee as most directors would do, Lucas instead asked for the merchandising and sequel rights. And now, no studio will ever sign away merchandising rights because of how much Star Wars made George Lucas. The film was originally only going to open at 32 theaters, but Fox was able to make more theaters play it by threatening to withhold The Other Side of Midnight, a drama based on the best-selling book of the same name, a film that was widely anticipated at the time. Of course, nowadays, few people remember Midnight as it was blown out of the water by Star Wars, making a respectable $24.7 million against a $9 million budget. But that would be pennies compared to Star Wars. Additionally, to get the leg on films such as Smokey and the Bandit, Fox opened it on May 25th, the Wednesday before Memorial Day. and Fox had a lot riding on this film. If it tanked, the studio would be in peril. Well, George Lucas actually made a bet with his friend and fellow director Steven Spielberg about whose film would make less, Lucas's Star Wars versus Spielberg's Close Encounters of the Third Kind, and the winner would get 2.5% of the loser's receipts from that film. And Mr. Spielberg is still making money off of Star Wars. The film wound up drawing massive crowds, much to the surprise of George Lucas, who was skeptical of reports about the film's success and didn't realize he had made a mega blockbuster until the story of its success aired on CBS News while he was on vacation in Hawaii, and that he had made a fortune, enough to help Francis Ford Coppola, who had produced his prior film American Graffiti, fund Apocalypse Now. It would end up playing in several theaters for over a year, and even made 2 premieres at Mann's Chinese Theater, first on its opening day, and second on August 3rd, 1977, accompanied by the droids and Darth Vader leaving their prints in the theater lot, having had to previously hand over the theater for William Friedkin's fantasy flop Sorcerer. Through all its releases, the original Star Wars would make $461 million in the United States, and another $314.4 million overseas. Though information about the original's run is sketchy, there is a fair amount of information about the special edition's release, where it made $118.6 million, led by the United Kingdom, with other big markets being Japan, Germany, and France. And Japan wound up being a major concern for the studio, as they weren't sure how the film would play. And they got especially concerned after it got a silent reaction. Though, once they were told silence equals respect in Japan, their fears were unfounded and it became a phenomenon there. Back to domestically, the original run made $307.26 million, adding another $15.48 million in a 1982 reissue, and then saw the special edition in 1997 make $138.26 million. Worldwide, in its lifetime, Star Wars made $775.4 million, of which after theaters take their cut, Fox would see back $373.1 million, which would mark a massive return for all parties involved, and driving the studio to record-breaking profits. At that year's Academy Awards, Star Wars would receive 10 nominations, including nods for Picture, Director, Supporting Actor for Alec Guinness, and Original Screenplay, winning 6 for Original Score, Costume Design, Sound, Art Direction, Editing, and Visual Effects, with a special achievement for Sound Effects Editing. The estimated theatrical pre-participant profit of this film is $335.6 million. Thanks for watching, press the like button, be sure to subscribe, and follow me on Twitter at Tyler the Analyst.
Remember, the Force will be with you, always.